everyone, welcome back to another episode of More to It. My name is Jason McConnell.
And my name is Todd Norton. Today we are joined by Jennifer Swindell. And Jennifer, really excited about today's topic. We're covering education. Jennifer is a third-generation Idahoan with 30 years of experience as an Idaho journalist, including, really notably, and I'd love to have more conversation with her about this, Idaho Statesman's first female sports editor, and she also covered government and education during that time. About 11 years ago, she founded the Idaho Education News, and she continues to serve as its CEO and managing editor. And Ed News now has 2 million page views per year, so it's certainly growing, and it's a common source for people to look to in the state of Idaho and certainly in the region, I'm sure. She also serves the community as a member of the board of directors for the Boise Metro Chamber and the Idaho Press Club, and is the past president of the Idaho Golf Association. You are a very busy person, Jennifer, and we are grateful for your time spent with us today.
I look forward to it.
So thank you very much. The first area I'd like to explore is Jason and I, right, have just been, as we've been looking at things, and we've just been struck at the sort of rapidly changing discussions around education broadly, right, in both primary and secondary, and to some degree university, but that's not really our focus today. It's true of probably teaching and school administration, and in particular school board oversight in school districts and whatnot. Very few people, I think, are in as good of a position for you to weigh in on that as you are, just because you've been covering it during that entire time. Would you help us understand a little bit of the terrain and how things have changed in the last decade or so?
Certainly, school has changed a bit, but there's a lot of things that have stayed the same. But some of the most important things, or the biggest changes I've seen, is school choice has become very popular. Especially in Idaho. 25 years ago, we had no charter schools. Now we have 77 charter schools.
Oh my.
And which is about 10% of our student population. And there's 2 to 3 new schools pop up every year with charter schools. And of course, the pandemic changed the way that we govern schools a bit. And funding, the way we fund schools has changed as well.
So help us understand what's driving the push towards charter schools. What do you think? Because I noticed that trend elsewhere too. That's happening in the state that I'm in right now. It's happening.
I think Utah just passed some legislation, or they're on their way to potentially passing some as well.
Yeah.
In Idaho, it began as a tool for innovation. They were going to have incubators, so to speak, have schools try unique or niche themes, STEM charters, arts charters.
Yep.
We have a medical arts charter, or even alternative type schools. And they've also been a way for parents to have more choice in their child's academics. So in Idaho, the more of a traditional public school proponents fought the start of charters, but now they're here to stay. Like I said, we have 77 charters. They're funded by state tax dollars. They're public schools, and they're a school of choice. In Idaho, of those 77, it's kind of interesting. The highest performing schools in Idaho are charters, and the lowest performing schools in charters, because they serve such a wide variety of students. They serve, for example, children who are not successful in public schools, maybe have failed out or been expelled, and then they go to an alternative school or an online-only school. And sometimes their results often aren't even up to the state averages, because they're just simply trying to serve these kids who wouldn't have any success. And then we have these very high-performing charter schools that parents seek to put their children in.
So is like IDLA, is that considered a charter school, or is that part of the public school system?
It's a charter school, right?
That's what I was thinking.
We have a handful of online only learning, but they're all state, and parents can choose to put their children there. The problem that we have in Idaho is that we have a lot of rural communities that don't have access to charters,
Yep.
whereas Boise has 5 to 7 different charters that parents can choose from. What the debate is this year at the legislature are whether or not, school choice is charter schools, but school choice is also private religious schools. And currently it's against the law in Idaho for state tax dollars to filter to private or religious schools. And there are lawmakers that want to change that and create what's called a voucher or a scholarship for private use.
And Idaho's not alone in that sense. Am I right in saying that? I mean, I've heard of the voucher movement in other parts of the country too. Am I off base on that?
No, you're absolutely right. And there's been cases that have come before the United States Supreme Court, one in particular out of Montana. So Idaho has what's called a Blaine Amendment, where, and I'm just going to simplify this for you, but the Blaine Amendment does not allow the state to fund religious schools. And this was argued in Montana, not directly the same as in Idaho, but it was argued in Montana that the money would go to the parent, and then the parent could choose to spend it on a religious school. And so the debate in Idaho right now is the proponents for vouchers say that our Constitution is okay with this happening because the money goes from the state to the parent, not from the state to the private school. And then those that are opposing it say that's semantics.
I was going to say, I would think at a collective level, I can understand the individual. I mean, I can understand the individual level of the argument, but I could also, it seems like at the collective level of managing a school system, it also creates a resource question, right? Or a resource, I don't want to say drain but a resource is moving from public schools then to private, to individual choices. That must be a resource question for a variety of school districts, I would think.
Right. If the money's following the child and the child is leaving public schools, the public schools will have less money.
Yep.
But they still have to provide an environment of students that might attend. Right. It's more about the enrollment and not the attendance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, public schools are certainly fighting this loss of money and arguing that the state shouldn't be filtering money that way. We already, as a state, we pay for charters. So a school district like the Boise School District, which is the second largest in Idaho, has had declining enrollment in each of the last 10 years.
Yep.
And that's because kids are thousands of kids are choosing charter schools. So they're losing the money and they're losing the students.
The students.
I think the intersection between that problem, enrollment and budgeting is fascinating. The state I'm in currently, Wyoming, goes through boom and bust cycles where we have towns that boom for a while due to some sort of industry. And then when that industry falls flat, you end up with a massive high school that now simply doesn't have enough kids to fill it because the city itself has shrunk. And so, what y'all are describing in Boise reminds me of that. It's the same type of problem because you have to build the infrastructure. You have to build the infrastructure to accommodate people. And then what if the people don't show up? It's interesting. It's very fascinating.
And Idaho is the second fastest growing state in the country. Mm-hmm. So we have kids populations coming in, and they're coming into different communities. And so there are other communities that are growing so fast they can't keep up with the infrastructure. And charters are helping with that in some areas, but it's all about where they're being built, and it's kind of a hodgepodge.
My understanding is there's actually been some redistricting in the last few years just to manage that sort of population, the shift. Yes.
Idaho had a redistricting last year, every 10 years based on the census.
Yep.
And so, yeah, so this latest election year, there was some redistricting in our legislators, our 35 districts.
Yep. I mean, just even of schools, right? Drawing different school boundary lines. I think there's a little bit of that or not.
Not much. Within a district, maybe, moving around the boundaries of a elementary school. But from district to district, it's pretty hard to change that because people don't want to change districts.
Yeah. Yeah, understandable. Jennifer, I wonder if we could explore a little bit if you have any insight, because you covered, I mean, you were covering school boards, I'm sure, during the time of COVID, right? And we've had other guests on and we've explored a little bit and talked a bit about how school boards suddenly found themselves in a very different situation than maybe they were 10 or 15 or, years ago, or even 5 years ago, right? Of being in a position where they're looking to guidance from the health district, trying to make choices about how to manage, masks or attendance and, and things like that. Could you talk a little bit about that? And has that had any sort of durable impact on school boards that we see now?
What makes Idaho unique is we're a bit of a libertarian state where everyone, you want local control. And we do that to a great extent. Even the way when we fund schools, there's not a lot of systemic requirements for the money. We basically fund it, and then the local leadership, school boards, can fund things the way they want. For example, teacher pay varies greatly in Idaho. Everyone gets the same amount from the state, but each district can supplement if they want from other funding sources like property taxes or discretionary funds. So you'll have those that live in Sun Valley making $80,000 a year and those that live in Garden Valley making $40,000 a year, but the teacher's doing the same thing. So we've all long been in favor of local control. So when the pandemic hit, the governor did not have statewide sweeping requirements. Each community got to do their own thing, and that included schools and mayors. So I work in Boise and I live in neighboring Eagle, and their masks requirements were completely different. The restaurants in Boise were closed, and in Eagle, they were open and didn't even require a mask. And so the same was said for school districts. Some were hybrid, some were online only, and a school district like Lewiston never shut its doors and barely required masks. And so since it was all over the board, there was a lot of pressure put on trustees because they were the ones making the decisions. And as you can imagine, in each school, there was parents that wanted each and all in one of those. And so if a parent didn't like what the school board decided, they moved their kids. And so enrollment dipped drastically. They either kept them home. That was the 1 year in the last 20 years that we've had a dip in enrollment, and they either kept them home, especially the little kids, right? Or they online only, or the online schools grew quite a bit. It's since leveled back out to where it was. But trustees in Idaho also, they are not paid. They're volunteer, but it is an elected position. But back in the old days, and certainly in smaller communities, you're kind of begging people to serve. And it's the local business owner, the local farming community that steps up and serves, and they don't have the experience of running. In Idaho, for example, most districts are the town's largest employer. And so you have school boards basically serving as CEOs of the community, not only educating kids, but spending large amounts of tax dollars and hiring and evaluating the school superintendent. So it's a huge responsibility for no pay, and a lot of critique happens.
So, Jennifer, something I picked up on during the pandemic was so many governmental commissions, boards, and what have you started running their meetings on Zoom. And so for the first time ever, You didn't have to actually look up a schedule, figure out what room the meeting was in, and go there. All of a sudden, I knew people who were watching city council meetings on their phone or something like that. Do you think that dynamic is driving some of this newfound focus on school board meetings?
Certainly, and I consider that to be a win from COVID because I believe in transparency and openness and making those meetings available to all patrons so that they can evaluate those that they elected into position. It's certainly changed things because we had some controversy in Caldwell earlier this week. We didn't go to the meeting, we didn't watch the meeting, but the next day at Ed News, we were able to watch the video of the meeting and then write a story from it. And we are able to do that with North Idaho schools when we're based in Southern Idaho. So it's certainly made it all far more transparent. And I think that's a good thing.
Raising the discussion or the area of tension within school board meetings, it's one of the areas that I'm really interested in leaning into and thinking about. As we had talked about just a little bit previously, it seems like those sorts of interactions, almost everybody walks away a little frustrated, right? Constituents are frustrated because any range of they wanted any range of outcomes of the meeting. The school board members are often I don't want to use the word targeted, but certainly there's some relatively harsh words, aimed at them. And it seems like just a really tense situation. Are there some things that we could do better just as a society, right? Or as constituents in an area to make those more productive spaces?
Certainly. In Idaho, boards are not required to take any training at all. The state, like I said before, leaves that up to each district if they want to have training. And I think the training would help, even in just how to run a meeting, the mechanics of a meeting, not so much what you're talking about, but what's the best way to hold a meeting and allow for some participation or not. I mean, it's not supposed to be a public meeting. It's a meeting held in public. And often people want to participate, but that's not the purpose of a meeting. Or, understanding an agenda and following what's supposed to be voted on, what's not, what can happen in executive session, what cannot happen in the executive session, all those things. There's not a lot of expertise. And I think that would help. I wish people would become more involved in their school boards, even if you don't have children, because there's a lot of other things that are decided, like employment opportunities, your state and property taxes are spent through there. And so when I talk about it a lot, I say, we all know who your president is, but do you know who your local school board trustees are? Because they actually have more influence on your current life and your property taxes, and because they're the ones that decide to run levies and bonds and hire and evaluate superintendents and decide on curriculum. And do you know who they are? Do you know when the elections are? Have you been to a meeting? Because you should, and follow the progress of those dollars and those decisions.
Are there things that you think constituents might be able to focus on, right? Because and I agree with you that the training and just how to run a meeting would make good sense. Are there things that sort of the general public could do? There's a lot of concerns. I see a lot of concerns voiced at school board meetings. Are there better ways to do that, more productive ways, do you think, based on what you've seen? Now, I know that there's a whole range of cases and they differ widely, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. You've watched a lot of school board meetings, I'm sure.
Yeah. The mundane meetings, they call them, when actually they're actually quite important because they're deciding how to spend money, because they have lots of money and lots of choices for those monies. And no one pays attention. But yet when you say things like masks or dress codes, people get very excited about those kinds of emotional issues, or book banning. So I would say be consistent in your interest in the government, just like you would city government or county government. and be consistently involved. Look at the agendas, find out who your trustees are, talk to them, vote, be educated voters, not just voters, informed voters, and participate yourself. Go to meetings, send them emails. Where do you want to see money go? Because if there's certainly plenty of choices. Do you increase salaries of teachers or classified staff, or are you participating in the hiring of a new superintendent? It's all community engagement.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And a lot of it is, in some respects, sort of the basics of just civil society, right? Just participating in our governance and whatnot. So, and in that regard, I mean, so we have kids in school, and we've reached out on occasion. We try very hard not to be helicopter parents, if you will, but on occasion, school board meetings and not school board meetings, but we meet with teachers, and I have been struck at the challenges in their schedule, how little prep time they have. I'm really empathetic in that regard at the sort of challenges. And that only comes because, we've been willing to sit down and have conversations with teachers. So the same in some respects is true of school board members, right? And I appreciate you emphasizing that.
Oh, there's so many more services than there were 20 years ago. Mental health, counseling, individual learning plans is a very popular new way where each kid has their own. When I was in school, all 8th graders took Algebra 1 and all 9th graders took Algebra 2. Well, that's not how we do it now. They have plans that are individualized, right? And they progress when they master a topic. And so that just requires a lot more work and a lot more planning. We also have found in Idaho that only 38% of high school graduates go on to college. So most kids do not continue their education past high school. So is our K-12 system serving those kids? They're not going on to some form of post-secondary education. So did they get the training they needed in high school to be successful young adults? And that's a question the school system is asking itself, which is leading to the growth of career technical programs. And that's not something that we had, it was welding and that was about it. But now there's far more other programs like culinary tracks and EMT type stuff and cosmetology, which is very much more sophisticated now than it was. And so schools aren't built for that. And so that's why Idahoans are leaning towards alternative ways for teachers to be certified. You don't have to go through the traditional path of the College of Education. You can be a business person, for example, and then work your way into teaching, accounting or whatever business is your background. And that's also unique.
So, Jennifer, thinking big picture, what do you see as the top 2 or 3 challenges facing our public education system these days?
School choice. How do we manage school choice? At what length do parents get to choose the best environment for their children? To the other side of it, saying the defense and of public schools, which educate all kids. And then I think that it's what I just had mentioned. Are we training kids to be successful young adults, no matter what they want to pursue? Do they have financial literacy? Can they balance a checkbook? Can they do their own taxes? Should the education system begin to prepare kids for those routes other than just calculus? Because I think, are used to being a college prep situation. And then there's the mental health. Mental health is especially since COVID, has become a big part of the K-12 system where it didn't exist before. And then funding. How do you continue to support good teachers and make sure that you retain and recruit the very best for your kids? And parents are kind of demanding a bit more. You used to just go to your neighborhood school and that was that. But now parents are a bit more involved. Certainly the top 25%. and they have big expectations, which it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jennifer, we so appreciate your time. Thank you so very much. I know that we know that you're busy and you have a lot going on. Appreciate your expertise in this area. It's been really a joy to spend a few minutes in talking with you, and thank you.
Thank you. And many of these questions are answered at idahoednews.org and in depth. And we have a full-time staff that writes every day and covering policy creation and implementation, and we're free. So I encourage you to look at that site.
Yeah, I agreed. It's been fantastic. It's a wealth of information. It's a really good space. So thank you for all that you do there as well.
Thank you, Todd.
The views, thoughts, analysis, and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the authors, the hosts, and the podcast participants. They do not necessarily reflect the opinions or views of Boise State University, the University of Wyoming, or the state boards of education for either Idaho or Wyoming, and no endorsement of the material contained in this podcast by those entities is implied.